Good morning. In much of the country, people are beginning to mix with other households outdoors as we take an early step out of the long, cold, dark tunnel of lockdown into the sunlight. But as we look around, this new world won't be the same as the one we left behind. There is already talk of social restrictions long ahead and calls for vaccine passports to get to the pub. Boris Johnson, that dishevelled libertarian, has been changed by the shock therapy of coronavirus. And the trouble for Tory rebels, even for opposition parties, is that if you look at the polling, the freedom-loving British seem, when push comes to shove, to quite like being ordered about. Out of the tunnel, will we find ourselves in a finger-wagging country surrounded by a thicket of new rules? As the Chancellor tells us to go and have fun, I'll be joined in the studio by the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, and by the Government Scientific Advisor, Professor Mark Woolhouse. Wales has become the first nation in the UK to relax the lockdown measures, so I'll be speaking to the First Minister there, Mark Drakeford, to talk about that and the crucial upcoming elections, which are, of course, happening in Scotland too. I'll be talking to Lorna Slater, co-leader of the Scottish Greens, who may be pivotal in the next Scottish Parliament. And later on, politics of a very different variety with Andra, the American singer and actor hotly tipped for an Oscar for her performance as the late, great Billie Holiday. And to go through the day's news, the BBC's health editor Hugh and Jessica Elgot, deputy political editor of The Guardian. So let's crack on with it, beginning with the headlines. The news read today by Roger Johnson.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. People aged over 50 in England are being urged to book their coronavirus vaccination ahead of an expected shortage in supply from next month. A quarter of those aged between 50 and 54 have yet to be vaccinated. It's thought that there will be fewer first appointments available as NHS England focuses on delivering second doses to patients throughout April. The National Medical Director of NHS England has said that people should not squander the gains made against coronavirus during lockdown. It's ahead of an easing of restrictions. Professor Stephen Powis says COVID-19 still has the capacity to wreak more havoc and ill health on a significant scale amid concerns over new variants. It comes as groups of up to 6 people or 2 households can socialise outdoors in parks and gardens in England from tomorrow. Meanwhile, Wales has become the first UK nation to lift travel restrictions within its borders. The stay local rule, in place since December, has been scrapped in favour of unlimited travel within Wales, and groups of 6 people from 2 households can meet up outdoors in private gardens. A second MP has defected from the Scottish National Party to join the new pro-independence group being set up by Alex Salmond. Neil Hanvey, the MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, will join the Alba Party, which is set to contest the Scottish parliamentary elections in May. Yesterday, the former Scottish Justice Secretary, Kenny MacAskill, announced that he would stand as a candidate. More than 100 people were killed by Myanmar's security forces yesterday, making it the deadliest day of protesting since the ruling military's coup last month. The actions have been widely condemned by both the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who said that Washington is horrified, and the UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who called the violence a new low. That's all from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Now back to you, Andrew.
Very many thanks for that. Now, as you know, what I try to do now is to find a theme in the papers, but the editors haven't made it easy for me this morning. To the extent there is one, it's a kind of general good cheer theme. There's the Sunday People, Summer of Love, it says. The Sunday Express, back to the life we love. Optimistic Boris toasts Happy Monday as Minister says economy is ready for liftoff after Easter. And then the Mail has got that story about the Moderna vaccines arriving to save us. And it says Boris says he's counting the days to a pint and a haircut. Perhaps not surprisingly, the Observer takes a slightly more hostile view of the Prime Minister. PM branded irresponsible over back to the office call, it says. But there are lots and lots of other stories around. The Sun has a royal story there. The Sunday Times has a very, very detailed and pretty ferocious attack on the former Prime Minister David Cameron over his links with Greensill, this company, and what they describe as a toxic banker. There's a lot of detail in that, and I'm sure a lot for David Cameron to talk about in due course as well. The Sunday Telegraph, meanwhile, has gone for the rash of stories about a so-called rape culture, or at least a highly misogynistic culture in lots and lots of famous private schools, though the Observer, I should say, says that actually the situation is even worse in many of the state schools. Now, Hugh Pym, we have you here, and we have you here partly because you will give us the truth about what's going to happen over the next couple of days in terms of the restrictions.
Well, certainly, Andrew, there is a lot going to be happening in England from tomorrow. As you say, the Sunday Express, very optimistic quotes from Boris Johnson there, back to the life we love. He's saying there's nothing in the data that will put him off moving ahead with lifting restrictions in England. According to the current plan, he looks ahead to haircuts and having a drink in a beer garden, but that's from April the 12th. So in England from tomorrow, groups of 6 can meet outdoors or in private gardens, and there'll be some outdoor sports allowed as well. And in fact, the Sunday Mirror have a piece on all the things changing in England from tomorrow, and then from April the 12th, non-essential retail and some outdoor hospitality. Of course, Wales has already lifted restrictions on travel within Wales, but no crossing the border. And in Scotland, later this week, they'll move to a stay local message from stay at home. Northern Ireland will allow on Thursday a bit more in terms of numbers being able to meet outdoors.
So everybody is moving in the same direction, but at slightly different speeds and in slightly different ways.
Yes, that's right. And that's down to the devolved governments deciding based on the data in their nations how they want to move. Of course, we've had warnings today as well from NHS England. Professor Stephen Powers said, let's not throw all these gains away by taking the rules being too relaxed about the rules. Let's take it one step at a time and not allow inhibitions to be thrown away. And the Prime Minister simultaneously talks about a third wave eventually washing up on these shores. So we wonder how that's consistent with the restrictions being eased. But we'll find out maybe later in the programme. Well, they're watching what's happening in some other European countries very much in terms of rising cases there. Yeah.
Jessica Elgot, let's turn to the 2 front pages I mentioned. Well, one front page I certainly mentioned was the Sunday Times. Quite an important moment for the former Prime Minister.
It's an extraordinary story about Cameron's links with Greensill, particularly during his time as Prime Minister, when Lex Greensill was a so-called supply chain finance advisor to the government, which involved his reach across government departments being extraordinary. One of the ones the Sunday Times picks out is facilitating this multi-billion-pound loan scheme to pharmacies, which is essentially, dealing with persistent late payments from the NHS to pharmacies by using his loan scheme rather than just saying the NHS should pay pharmacies quicker. It's an extraordinary story and shows how deeply the connections went with Cameron. And this, obviously there's been this lobbying scandal, which Cameron himself was something he said when he was Prime Minister wanted to address, said would be the next big scandal, and now he's caught up in it.
Lex Greensill, great first name, was obviously a charismatic figure, not just in terms of winning over David Cameron, but also Sir Jeremy Hayward, the former Permanent Secretary, who's kind of seen as the ultimate public servant, but is also very heavily involved in this story.
Yeah, absolutely. And his wife said that he never personally profited from anything, but he seemed to have been very keen to facilitate Lex Greensill getting involved in lots of different government schemes and government departments. The breadth of which is extraordinary, from pitching to upgrade motorways to getting involved in funding Typhoon jets. And it's just he seems to reach across every pie.
A finger in every pie. So that's the former Prime Minister. What about the current Prime Minister? Are the papers universally easy reading for Boris Johnson this morning?
Not the Sunday Mirror, no. We're back to Jennifer Arcuri, and I feel like we've had this kind of teasing drip from Jennifer Arcuri, maybe over the course of 18 months, where she's hinted about this potential affair with Boris Johnson, and she's finally come out and kind of done a big kiss and tell about it all. I think mainly because, and it's interesting to try and work out what her motivation is for doing it right now, but she clearly feels wronged by him in that he didn't stand by her in the accusations that she was on these taxpayer funded trips, which is actually the real issue here, that that it's not just a salacious affair and questions about the Prime Minister's character. It's about whether he enabled her to go on these taxpayer funded trips, which she claims were legitimate trade missions linked to her career, but she very much feels, and that comes across, that he should have come out and defended her.
And City Hall in London, I think, is still conducting an investigation into that. Hugh, let me turn to the other big vaccine story this morning, which is the Moderna jabs. Just remind us, these are made in the United States, and we have ordered how many of them?
17 million doses
17 million.
for the UK. Now, AstraZeneca and Pfizer, as everyone knows, have been rolled out extensively. This was the next one coming through. It's been approved by the UK regulator, the MHRA. But the question is, when would these first doses arrive from Moderna? And the answer is, it seems, at some stage in April. The Mail on Sunday saying it'll be within 3 weeks' time. These doses will start arriving. Now, this is a pretty critical time because a consignment from India supposedly was going to be 10 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. In fact, only 5 million have come through. So that has meant they've had to slow things down in terms of rolling out the first doses, concentrate on second doses in April. But if Moderna arrives in good time, according to the briefing to the paper, they can start on the under 50s pretty quickly. From the middle of April, it seems.
Sounds like an old black and white Western. Will the US cavalry arrive in time to save us?
It does seem a little bit like that, although, of course, we'll need to see them actually arriving and just see if they can. The minister,
no, it's an if, it's not a definite.
Ministers are pretty confident they can still get to an offer to all adults by the end of July. So Moderna is going to be quite important in all of that.
There's been a lot of relatively loose talk about vaccine nationalism and accusations being tossed to and fro across the English Channel. But the UK is going to send vaccines to Ireland. Some of the detail about why is interesting, but nonetheless, that is as it were, a useful thing for us to be doing.
Yes, a briefing to the Sunday Times on this. A minister saying it's good politics in terms of being able to say that the UK government is helping the Irish government by sending doses across the border. And of course, it's good for public health. I think that's the important thing here.
And good for our public health too.
And good, exactly, because of the cross-border movement of people between the North and the Republic. But certainly an interesting move, the idea that some doses will be handed to the Irish health authorities.
Now, if there's one thing that we all remember about the advice over this pandemic is wash your hands, sing happy birthday twice, wash your hands, and be very, very careful of all flat surfaces. Now, there's a very interesting piece, I think, by the Sunday Times' science editor, suggesting that this might, in fact, be wrong.
Well, Ben Spencer, that's right, the science editor in the Sunday Times, has done an interesting piece on how the advice a year ago was very much the virus could linger on surfaces, particularly plastic and stainless steel. Everything would have to be wiped down.
All that scrubbing of Amazon parcels and you name it.
Cardboard, it might linger for 24 hours. Well, what the piece says is experts now believe that the risk of picking the virus up from a surface and then getting infected is very, very low. The real risk comes from aerosol transmission. That's the virus travelling through the air when you're talking to somebody or close to somebody.
Jessica, this is what old Fleet Street hacks would call a marmalade dropper of a story, isn't it? That advice not being right from the beginning.
Yeah, it's really phenomenal, and it also is very bad for some businesses which do not have a lot of ventilation. I'm thinking of small cafes, where they've really done the kind of hygiene theatre of we're wiping every surface, we're spraying everything down to try and make people feel safe. And actually, can you ever really make those spaces safe? It's quite a difficult one for them.
There's so much we could be talking about this morning, Jessica, but let me ask you about what's going on in Scotland, because it's a real conundrum, I think, to people. It's a very, very complicated electoral system in Scotland in two parts. Alex Salmond has launched this Alba party, and he said this will make the case for Scotland in the new becoming independent in the new parliament much, much stronger, whereas lots of people in the SNP think it will actually damage the independence case. Is there any way of innocent souls such as you and me penetrating the truth of this?
It's interesting that he says he's aiming to build a super majority for independence. What Nicola Sturgeon will be worried about is he might actually deny her actual majority. But obviously it's going to be difficult for her having to fight this battle, this personal battle with her old enemy at a time when she'd like to be riding high in the polls. And I see Scottish Labour today says they don't want to see a psychodrama, but I suspect that's
exactly what we're going to get. And everything will depend upon the tone of that contest. Hugh, Jessica, thanks very much indeed for that. The weather now, we've had some gorgeous days, though pretty cold. But there is a rumour, my friends, of a heat wave ahead. Is it more than a rumour? Could it actually be true? Over to Darren Bett in the weather studio. Darren. No.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It is going to be warmer over the next few days. Today, though, is cloudy, windy. We've got some rain around too. The rain in Wales should tend to ease, but it's going to be wet for a while in the northwest of England. Rain at times today for Northern Ireland and just getting wetter in Scotland. Should brighten up, though, through the Midlands and eastern parts of England. Bit of sunshine coming through. Even though it's cloudy and it's windy, temperatures are higher than they were yesterday, up to 15 or 16 degrees. But there's more wet weather to come into this evening across North Wales, northwest England, and overnight it stays wet at times across Northern Ireland and getting very wet, actually, in the hills of western Scotland. Windy night again, a lot of cloud. It all points to it being a mild night. Now into tomorrow, and we should see the back of that rain for a while across Northern Ireland, the northwest of England, but it's still very wet over the hills in western parts of Scotland. We get a bit more sunshine coming up from the south across England and Wales, and the winds do gradually ease, and it starts to warm up even in eastern parts of Northern Ireland and the northeast of Scotland. Highest temperatures in eastern England of 19 or 20 degrees. Tuesday, though, likely to be even warmer in the sunshine. We're tapping into some tropical air. But on Wednesday, that rain moves its way southwards and it introduces Arctic air later on in the week. So warming up early in the week and then getting much colder later in the week. Andrew.
Yikes, and wet Wales. But Wales also becomes the first country in the UK, as we've been saying, to ease COVID restrictions. It's also beginning a crucial election campaign to decide who leads it out of the pandemic. I'll be speaking to some of the candidates in the coming weeks, and you'll be able to find a full list on the BBC website. But we begin this morning with the First Minister, Labour's Mark Drakeford. Mr Drakeford, welcome. When can you tell the people of Wales that this will definitely have been the last lockdown?
I'm afraid I don't think anybody responsible in my position will be able to do that anytime soon. Of course, we hope it won't be, but we see what's happening on the continent of Europe. We know about the new variants that are being discovered around the globe. There's a job of work still to be done in making sure the coronavirus is genuinely in the rearview mirror. You've started to open out. When will be the first time that somebody like yourself can go into a Welsh pub and order a pint of something absolutely delicious? Well, I'm hoping that by the end of April, people will be able to enjoy outdoor hospitality. Meeting indoors, we know, is always more dangerous. That's likely to have to wait until May. That is very, very bad news for a lot of small businesses in Wales. The chief executive of the Welsh Beer and Pub Association, Emma McClarkin, says hundreds of brewing and pub businesses across Wales are desperate for a roadmap with dates on when they can reopen. But they're not going to get that, are they? They're going to have to wait. Well, I'll be setting out on Thursday of this week the prospectus through the whole of April and into May. It will give the sector the certainty that it is looking for. But this is an inherently uncertain time. We study the figures in Wales every single day. At the moment, things are heading in the right direction. But we know how quickly this virus can change. And I'm not prepared to give people false assurances too far into the future. One thing that could, of course, help is so-called vaccine passports to allow people to go into restaurants and pubs, show they've been vaccinated or had a test recently. Are you going to introduce that in Wales? Prepared to go on considering this on a four-nation basis. I think there are definitely prizes to be won through domestic vaccine certification, but there are some very big practical and ethical challenges to face as well. What about those people who can't be vaccinated because their health conditions don't allow that to happen? What would happen to them? How could we be... I'm sorry, you could account for that on the app. There could be a system of self-certification for that. Well, I think that just takes us then into the practical issues. If it's a self-certification system, then what reliance could we put on the fact that somebody produces a certificate? A certificate would have to mean something, and that inevitably means we'd have to have a system to make sure that that was authentically the case. Now, I don't say that these problems can't be solved, but I am saying that we've got to work together to make sure that if we are to introduce such a system, it has to be fair and it has to be reliable.
And you can do that in Wales yourself. You're not simply going to wait for Michael Gove to tell you what to do.
Well, we wouldn't be doing that, but I did have an opportunity on Tuesday of this week to discuss this very issue with Mr Gove and with the First Ministers of Scotland and Northern Ireland. I think it's an issue that we should work on together, that we should solve together. But of course, all parts of the United Kingdom retain our autonomous decision-making.
Now, you've suggested that some restrictions could still be in place at the end of the year. Can you give the people of Wales any idea whatever about when they will return to something like normal life?
Well, by the end of this year, I still think that we will need to go on doing the things we've learnt to do. The mask wearing in crowded places, the hand washing, the social distancing and so on. This virus is with us for the foreseeable future, albeit that because of vaccination and other measures we are taking, life can be and will be better. But the idea that with one bound we are free and the coronavirus is something that is over, that's not my message to people here in Wales. We have to go on doing the things that keep each other and one another safe.
Do you accept that you made some serious mistakes in the handling of coronavirus, given that Wales has such a terrible, terrible overall death rate?
Well, there's no doubt at all that when we look back, knowing what we know now, there are things that we might have done differently. But at every point in our handling of the virus, we have taken the best scientific advice that we can. We've made the decisions, the difficult decisions sometimes, to protect people here in Wales. Some parts of Wales have had a torrid time. And when we look back, we will look to see what we might have been able to differently, knowing what we knew then, rather than looking back and thinking about what we know now.
Yes, I understand that. But you had more lockdowns than in England, and the Welsh mortality rate is 196 deaths per 100,000, which is higher than the overall UK rate. So you had the lockdowns, and yet you didn't stop the death rate rising so high. What, in looking back, do you think is the single biggest mistake you made?
Well, I think when we look right back to the very beginning, if we had known then what we know now about the speed at which this virus can be transmitted, we would have taken some actions earlier than we did. And I think that would have been true across the United Kingdom. We've had no more lockdowns in Wales than anywhere else. We've generally gone into them earlier and gone into them deeper, because that's the advice that we've been given by SAGE and by our Chief Medical Officer, that you should act early and that you should act decisively. And that's what we've tried to do in Wales.
Now, I know we all pretend that polls don't matter and yet hover over them obsessively, but the polls for these elections suggest that Welsh Labour's going to face its worst ever performance in a Senate election. The current state of the Welsh Labour Party is 32% and on course for just 22 seats. Why do you think that drubbing might be about to happen?
Well, I don't think that drubbing is about to happen, so I'm not prepared to start from that premise. But I do think that this is a challenging election for the Labour Party in Wales, of course. Fighting it during a pandemic, fighting it at a time when we've been in office here for the whole of the period of devolution. But this will be an election in Wales about trust and about ambition. Who do people in Wales trust to complete the job of keeping Wales safe? Which is the party that has the genuine ambition to lead Wales not simply out of coronavirus, but into the sort of future that people in Wales want? My job, the job of Labour candidates and Labour activists throughout Wales, will be to have those conversations to persuade people once again that it is the Labour Party here which is closest to their hopes for the future and the party that they should trust again to be in government here in Wales.
Are you a unionist?
I believe in the United Kingdom. I think that Wales's future is best secured through participating in a successful United Kingdom, and I think the United Kingdom is better for having Wales in it.
You say that, but you've got no fewer than 3 candidates in these elections, Labour candidates who are pro-independence, and 51% of your party members are also pro-independence. I wonder if Labour in Wales is drifting in a pro-independence way quite fast.
Well, the experience of coronavirus on the one hand and the Johnson government on the other has undoubtedly made many people in Wales wonder whether we would be better off in a more detached position. Once you have conversations with people, when you begin to ask them what do they mean by independence, then I think what they describe is what we describe in the Labour Party.
The reason I'm asking about this is looking at one of the recent polls on independence. Independence is up to 39%, which is very high. I'm wondering if Mark Drakeford's kind of political legacy might be as the midwife for Plaid Cymru, a midwife for Welsh independence. And actually, you know, for all your handling of the pandemic, that is going to be the end result of this.
Well, the same poll that you quoted at me earlier showed independence in Wales at 14%. And I think that's a more genuine reflection of where actual independence is in the minds of Welsh people. My ambition, leading Wales, is to have powerful devolution where the decisions that matter to people in Wales are made by people who live in Wales, but where we go on being part of a United Kingdom that is fair to all and delivers for all.
It's just very, very odd that you say you're pro the United Kingdom, you're a unionist party, and yet 3 of your candidates are independence candidates. What's happened?
Well, as I say, the conversation of the last 12 months, the way the Welsh Government has used our powers to keep Wales safe and to do things in a way that continues to command the support of people in Wales, has led many people to ask whether the current arrangement is the right one. Now, I believe that the United Kingdom has to be fundamentally reformed if it is to survive, and that it is in greater peril today than it's been at any time in my political lifetime. But I go on making the case.
I'm sorry to jump in, but if after these elections you have the option or the necessity to go into a coalition government with Plaid, would you accept an independence referendum in Wales as the price for that?
I've always said myself that if a party that proposes such a referendum wins an election, then of course such a referendum should be held in Wales. But if you can't win an election with that proposition, then I don't think you've got the democratic mandate to do so.
So that sounds like no. Mark Drakeford, thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning. Now then, apart from being one of America's greatest singers, Billie Holiday was also an early civil rights icon. A new film tells the story of how the US government targeted Holiday for her insistence on singing Strange Fruit, that haunting indictment of lynchings in the Deep South. Its star, Andra, has been nominated for an Oscar in what is her film debut. She joined me from Los Angeles earlier on. I asked her if Billie Holiday was just as much a victim of her own addictions, a similar tragedy to that of Judy Garland.
Get her off that stage.
They're strange fruit, blood on the leaves.
You're like a hammer, come right back and hit harder than before.
She's singing it for all of us. Ain't no other Negro star bold enough to do it. Black body swinging. I'm being followed. I'm not gonna cower to no fist. In the southern breeze.
She's made something of herself and you can't take it because she's strong, beautiful, and black.
Judy Garland and Billie Holiday's experiences were very, very different, right? And the access to the drugs and the way that the government sort of, I mean, this is a different conversation almost for a different movie, but the way that the drugs were injected into our community and then the way we were criminalized for it. So my thing is, I hear that a lot. I hear that she, you know, yes, she was an addict, but she was trying to get clean. What you don't see in the film necessarily is that, you know, there were moments where Billie Holiday would be in rehab and she would wake up and there would be drugs on her nightstand. She wanted to get clean. They did not want her to get clean. And the war on drugs at the time really was created solely to go after her, primarily for singing Strange Fruit.
I cut Strange Fruit.
No, Joe, I want to sing the damn song, all right? The club advertises it. People pay good money to come here and hear me sing it.
I've told you 100 times, people in high places don't want you singing that song.
And I've asked you over 100 times, what people, Joe? What you looking at him for? I'm the one pays you.
The government.
Yeah, the government.
And for a British audience, Andra, just tell us a little bit about why exactly Strange Fruit was seen as such a dangerous song.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you for asking that. You know, so Strange Fruit is a song about lynching in America, which most people just associate with being hung from a rope, but lynching is a mob killing of Black people. And so this song is about lynching in America. It holds a mirror up to America and it shows that lynching was not a horrific act orchestrated by a fringe group of white supremacists. It was the culture in America. Those white supremacists were judges and were police officers and were townspeople, and kids and children would go, you know, see lynchings. It's why I don't do picnics, right? Because the sort of, the word is much older, but here in America was used and popularized by pick a nigga. It was basically you lynch someone, you burn their house and their property, and then you spread your blankets out and celebrate with your family. So it was a culture in America, and she was singing about that. And in addition, she was integrating audiences, trying to bring people together.
There's been a lot of noise about your performance in this film. What would it mean to win the Oscar in April?
Yeah, you know, I mean, what would it mean to win it? That's funny. I should have thought about this before I got on the call with you. But no, I think what it would mean is, I'll put it to you like this. I would hear something, you know, on set or while we were working, and they said, you know, don't worry, you won't work this hard again, because there's not meaty roles really like this for Black women. And I remember being floored, like, who else would have meatier roles, you know what I mean, right now than Black women in our stories and what we've been through and what we've supported and how we've overcome, and just to see that these stories have value.
Well, Andra Day, if it's not bad luck to say good luck, then good luck. And thanks for talking to us.
I receive it. Thank you so much. Take care.
Andra Day there, and you can see the United States versus Billie Holiday only on Sky Cinema or the streaming service Now TV. Could the Holyrood elections provide a breakthrough moment for the Scottish Greens? They've been confidently talking up the prospects of winning a record number of seats and going into coalition with the SNP. But this week, the former First Minister Alex Salmond announced the creation of a new pro-independence party which threatens that plan. In the first of my Scottish election interviews, I'm joined from Edinburgh by the co-leader of the Scottish Greens, Lorna Slater. Lorna Slater, welcome. Isn't it the case that the arrival of Alaba shoots in the foot your strategy of winning lots more MSPs on the list part of the system?
It absolutely does not do that. This new party has been thrown together at the last minute by a man who's less popular in Scotland than Boris Johnson is. The Scottish Greens have shown progress in every election in Scotland. We've had MSPs in the Parliament from the beginning, and we have an excellent track record of delivering things like fairer taxes in Scotland. Most people in Scotland pay less income tax than they do in England. We've won free school meals for primary children. We've run free bus travel for all young people. So the Scottish Greens have a track record that this new party does not.
You're certainly doing much better than the Greens south of the border are, but you are, in a sense, fishing in the same pool as this new party. That is, for voters who are really keen on a new referendum and really want Scottish independence, have been not giving their second votes to the SNP in the past, but to the Greens. And now they have an alternative. Now they have Alaba. You may say that Alex Salmond is unpopular. He's a very well-known figure in Scotland, and Kenny McCaskill, who's joined him, is as well. There are some big figures now taking you on in the list vote.
I absolutely don't agree that we're competing for the same voters. Scottish Green voters care about the climate, they care about fairness, they care about human rights. They care about the kind of policies that we'll be bringing forward, policies to upgrade Scotland's railways. We have a costed manifesto that involves rewilding large parts of Scotland and upgrading Scotland's homes. They're a totally different demographic than people that are likely to vote for a party that's been thrown together by a disgruntled ex-First Minister as part of his vendetta against our First Minister.
Well, talking of your First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, admitted to catastrophic errors in the handling of sexual harassment cases against Alex Salmond, and one of his accusers said her government had let down those women. But in the recent confidence vote, you promptly rode to her rescue. Why?
Because the third-party inquiry report came in. The First Minister did not mislead Parliament did not break ministerial code. So as far as we're concerned, the case is closed. This was a stunt by Scottish Conservatives to try and undermine the devolution settlement, undermine our Parliament. I, as a woman hoping to be working in the Parliament in 6 weeks, was very disappointed by the circus that was created around what should have been a process of making sure that women who work in the Parliament are safe.
There is also unease in Scotland, if I can put it like that the Crown Office, the state prosecutorial system, is simply too close to the political leadership of Scotland. You don't have that plurality, that division of powers that states always need. Are you worried that the Crown Office, that the system that went after Alex Salmond is too close to the Cabinet in Scotland?
Well, of course, in Scotland, the Scottish Green Party are in favour of Scottish independence, and we would like to revisit entirely how power is managed and how power is distributed in Scotland.
Do you think it's too tightly controlled at the moment?
I think that we need to look at the powers of Scottish committees and the powers that the committees have to hold Parliament to account. That is all a process of the evolving of devolution in Scotland, and hopefully part of what we'll do as we're building a new country, a new independent Scotland, is look at how all these things work.
Now, you are pro-independence, as you just made clear. If the SNP, perhaps with your help, fight for a referendum, win the election, and then Boris Johnson simply says, no, you can't have your referendum, as he's likely to, what do you do then?
Let's be clear that with the Scottish Greens, there has been a pro-independence majority in Parliament this entire last term.
And nothing has happened.
With the Scottish Greens, there will be a pro-independence majority this next term.
And nothing will happen.
What kind of country is Boris Johnson building if he is denying basic democratic mandate of the Scottish people? The Scottish people keep returning pro-independence majorities, and the Westminster government chooses to ignore that. That's a sugly peg to hang on.
It is a sugly peg, Lorna Slater, but nonetheless, you're giving me a rhetorical question in answer to my straightforward question, which is simply, what do you do?
It's about winning grassroots support for Scottish independence. And I think we do that by talking about the kind of country we want to build. And that is a fairer country, a country where we do things better than we do in the UK, as we already do with things like the fairer income tax and the free school meals. The Scottish people can see that we're looking at a change of direction. A lot of people are very concerned about the direction of travel of the UK. And Boris Johnson doesn't seem to have anything up his sleeve for keeping us in the Union, except for waving more flags around. He cannot win with this strategy.
All right, Lorna Slater, thanks so much for talking to us this morning. Much appreciated. Now then, as COVID infection rates continue to increase dramatically across Europe, the Prime Minister warned this week of a third wave washing up on our shores. Professor Mark Woolhouse from the University of Edinburgh is on the government's advisory body that models the pandemic, SPIM. He also advises the Scottish Government on its COVID response. And I asked him, now that 50% of adults have had their first dose of the vaccine, what would this third wave actually look like?
I think at some stage an uptick in the number of cases is inevitable as we relax restrictions. Although we vaccinate half the population, we haven't vaccinated everyone, so there's still potential for the virus to spread. The question is whether or not those increasing cases will translate into a large number of hospitalizations and deaths. Now, I'm pretty optimistic about this. I think the readout on the performance of the vaccines is excellent and very encouraging, but we have to be careful. There's no question that some of the more pessimistic scenarios out there do allow for a significant third wave. So that's something we have to continue to guard against.
And to be clear, that's because even the most effective vaccines are only 95% effective, so there are some people who are going to be caught anyway. There are some people who won't or haven't been vaccinated. And then there's the small number of seriously ill people below the age of 50. Is that right?
Well, that's exactly right. So over the whole population, there are tens of millions of people who are vulnerable to this virus if they haven't been vaccinated or the vaccine isn't effective in them. And a small percentage of a very large number is still a very large number. So what we need to do is to make sure we have the systems and the processes in place that we don't allow the virus to get out of control again.
And if that is, as it were, the third wave or the third large ripple or whatever we call it, we haven't even talked about new variants coming, because so far the variants that we see seem to be relatively ineffective at taking on the vaccines, but that may change.
Well, it may change. It's very difficult to guard against something in the future that's indeterminate. It's a concern. The government already has plans to produce another round of vaccination that will help protect people against some of the new variants that we know about. The crucial thing here is for the whole world, not just the UK, to be monitoring these variants, characterizing these variants as quickly as possible, and identifying causes of concern, things that we might need to update the vaccines to protect ourselves against.
You imply that we're going to have to live alongside coronavirus, if I can put it that way. What will that mean in practical terms?
Well, hopefully, because, as I say, the vaccines are performing so well, certainly against the variants we know about, that will be fairly close to the herd immunity threshold. And what that means is that any outbreaks will be fairly small and hopefully fairly easily contained. But I still suspect that looking forward, and I'm talking now right through 2021 into the years ahead, that we're still going to have to be alert to coronavirus. So there are still going to be situations where we might need to use personal protective equipment. We might well need to do some kind of social distancing, put some sort of biosecurity measures in place. And the important thing is, in case I'm being too optimistic and we're not close to the herd immunity threshold, that we also maintain our capacity to test and trace, and particularly to isolate people who are infected. And that final thing is going to remain important for the entire future, I think, that when we get cases of novel coronavirus, that those people are going to have to be asked to self-isolate and their contacts. And I think that's going to have to continue.
So this process of constant observation, monitoring and intervention, is there going to have to be some kind of new public body to do this?
Well, I think we're going to have to think very hard about coronavirus safety going forward. There's an analogy here. I used to advise the Food Standards Agency, and we have a very well-placed program, national program there to protect us from problems with food safety. And that works very well for the most part. And I think we're going to have something along those lines to make sure that we're protected against coronavirus. Now, Matt Hancock's announced a new agency that will help protect us against pandemics. And of course, we already have Public Health England, Public Health Scotland, and so on, that fulfill these roles. But I think we're going to have to pay explicit attention to coronavirus for the foreseeable future.
Even though you describe yourself as a relative optimist, what you say doesn't seem compatible with tearing up all restrictions and going back to life entirely as we knew it in June. Some of the things you're talking about, the testing and interventions, will in fact require legal underpinning.
Well, yes, I think that's right. I have to say I'm a little bit nervous about a full relaxation in June. I mean, obviously, we all want to relax as far as it is safe to do so. And it will be important that the government continues to be guided by the data in that respect to see. And this is a particularly important thing. Exactly how well are the vaccines performing? If they go on at this rate, I think we can get quite close to a full release. But the idea that we can suddenly emerge from this in one great bound, I think is a little over-optimistic. So you're right, my optimism is tempered there.
The delays in the vaccine rollout, how concerned should we be, both for those people waiting for a second vaccine, but also for people below the currently vaccinated age groups, because some of them will be vulnerable, won't they?
Yes, it will. And as you say, that is going to slow down the rate at which we can unlock. It's not just the actual number of vaccines given out, but the coverage, particularly of the most vulnerable groups. And so far, we've got through a lot of those vulnerable groups, at least with the first dose, and the coverage has been excellent, in the high 90%, far higher than many of the polls were suggesting the uptake would be at the beginning of the vaccination campaign. So that's really encouraging. So it's not just the rollout, but the coverage that matters. But yes, if we do have delays in getting people vaccinated the second time around, that is going to slow things down. Though the second vaccination is a booster, a lot of the protection afforded by the vaccine, 80 or 90% of it is given by the first dose, so we'll be a long way there. But I think we do have to bear in mind that we've still given half our adult population a single dose. If in the fullness of time, we're aiming to vaccinate everybody with 2 doses, we're something like 1/5 of the way there. So this is going to go on for quite a long time yet.
Lots of folk are thinking about pubs and holidays and restaurants. Do you think some form of so-called vaccine passport is now pretty much inevitable?
I think it's certainly something we have to consider seriously. as part of a wider package of measures that is designed to make our activities safe. And this is something that I think we need to start thinking much harder about. So far, over the last year, when we've tried to make ourselves safe, we tended to do this by stopping us doing activities, stopping us socializing, stopping us going to the pub, stopping us travel. Now, part of the whole point of living with this virus is we have to switch emphasis. We have to now start thinking about, okay, how do we make those activities safe? Now, we've already made them a lot safer for a lot of people by the rollout of the vaccine, but we may also need to have additional measures in place, as I said, social distancing, the screens and so on, for those activities that can be made safe. A lot of workplaces can be made safer, a lot of retail, a lot of hospitality can be made safer. And for those sort of activities, it's difficult to make completely safe. I'm thinking of things like nightclubs, large concerts, mass gatherings, and so on. That's where the passports come in, whether it's vaccine passports, test negative passports, or even immunity passports that we were talking about a year ago. So all of this is part of a package of measures designed to make activities safe as an alternative to stopping us doing them altogether.
Looking at everything you can see now, it's a very complicated picture. Is there a risk of another lockdown, do you think?
Well, I think that's one of the things we really want to avoid, and we absolutely have the tools in place and the knowledge in place to avoid that. So another lockdown next winter for any reason, whether it's an upsurge of the local variants that we have here or the importation of a new variant, I have to say, I think we should regard that as a failure of public health policy if we have to go that route again. Professor
Woolhouse, really interesting to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
You're welcome.
And I'm joined now by the Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden. Mr. Dowden, the return to the rule of six happens tomorrow in England. Is there any chance of a delay to the roadmap to have legal restrictions on mixing removed by June the 21st?
Well, good morning, Andrew. And I think today and tomorrow, important days, there is a sense of relief in the air. And the reason why we can take these slow steps towards easing is because we're on track, both with the rollout of the vaccine and the roadmap. So we're confident that we will deliver by mid-April on over 50s and the most vulnerable, and then we'll get everyone vaccinated by the end of July, which allows us to stick to that roadmap.
So all legal restrictions on mixing go in June?
Well, remember, as we go through each of these phases, essentially when we get to stage 3, which we're aiming for by mid-May, that is basically getting us back to where we were last summer. But the problem with where we were last summer, and I certainly see this in sectors for which I'm responsible, was they couldn't operate commercially in a viable way. So we need more people to be in theatres. We need more people to be in our sports stadium. So in order to get between May and June, that is why we're conducting a series of pilots to look at different factors that can be addressed to help us get to that point. So, for example, whether that is ventilation, whether that's behaviour, whether that is the spread of the infection. And we will undertake those pilots and then understand what further rules we have to have from the middle of June.
I will come to that, but let's sticking to the big picture for the moment, because Mark Woolhouse, who's one of the more optimistic of your advisors, says that he is nervous about a great big bang ending of restrictions. And that makes a lot of sense to people, because if you look at the halt or the delay in vaccines arriving in this country, if you think about some of the other problems that we're facing at the moment, then it seems Prime Minister, for instance, talking about a third wave washing up on our shores, that doesn't seem to quite fit with the idea of a general unlocking anyway.
Well, that's why we're pursuing this cautious roadmap. And remember, what we've chosen to do is have 5-week intervals between each stage. And the reason for having 5-week intervals is it gives you 4 weeks to see the effect of the spread from the easing, and then a week to prepare the rules. So ahead of each easing, we'll of course analyse the situation. We've set out these 4 key tests.
Be delayed. These things could be delayed.
Well, of course they could be delayed if the situation deteriorates. But at the moment, we are on track. So thanks to the work of the British people and the excellent vaccine rollout, we are confident both in going ahead with the easings from tomorrow and the next stages.
We've lost for the time being some 5 million AstraZeneca vaccines from India. Is the Moderna vaccine from America going to arrive like the cavalry in time to save us?
Well, we always knew there would be ups and downs in terms of the vaccine rollout. The key thing for your viewers to understand is that we remain on course to deliver the vaccine rollout by the middle of next month, that's to say all the over 50s. Now, we expect that in April Moderna will come, but we remain confident that we can deliver those two remaining milestones.
Vaccines without Moderna, if necessary. You've got enough to do it already.
I'm not going to get into the details of every element of the supply chain.
I just can't work out why you're confident. That's why I'm asking.
Because we always knew as we went through this, we set out a relatively cautious roadmap for the vaccine rollout. You will have seen ups and downs. We were surging ahead a couple of weeks ago. There's been a bit of a slowdown now, but that doesn't undermine our confidence that we will be able to deliver for that crucial group, the over 50s, by the middle of April, and then for the rest of the adult population by the end of July.
Can you guarantee everybody a second dose within 12 weeks? And will that be the same vaccine, or might you mix them?
Yeah, well, that is absolutely essential. And in all our planning throughout this, we have borne in mind that we have to get that second top-up in. So we're confident we'll be able to deliver it. And we are confident that it won't require mixing of vaccines.
Very interesting. Now, on the current plans, after May the 17th, we can all go on holiday. Looking at what's happening on the continent of Europe at the moment, is that really realistic?
Well, that's not actually the case that after May the 17th that we can go on holiday. What we have said is that we'll have this review of international travel led by the Transport Secretary. That's going to report at the beginning of April. Clearly, the situation on the continent is worrying. We're seeing rising cases, and it has been the case historically in previous waves that a couple of weeks, 3 weeks later, it hits the UK. Now, this time round, because of the progress with the vaccine, I think we can have more confidence that it won't hit us, but we do have to be vigilant. That's why people still need to abide by the rules after Monday. This isn't a complete free-for-all. This is a limited easing, which we will then test the impact of over the following 4 weeks.
Mark Woolhouse suggested that what may happen later in the summer is that you can go on holiday if you want to, but you'll have to accept more testing and possibly quarantine restrictions when you come back. In other words, it'll be a quid pro quo. If you want to go, you can go, but you're going to have to quarantine afterwards. Is that likely? Is that the kind of thing that you look forward to?
Well, that's precisely why we have got this task force to look into global travel. It will be reporting at the beginning of April. The purpose of doing that is to look at how we can ensure safe international travel. I know everyone desperately wants to get their summer sun, particularly after this dreadful winter that we've had, but we have to do it in a safe way, and we have to be mindful particularly of the risk of new variants.
I suppose the obvious point is that if you do that, an awful lot of people simply won't be able to afford it, and therefore won't be able to go on holiday and won't have those kind of optimistic, sunny forever headlines we've seen in today's papers.
Well, I think we're in danger of speculating and preempting on what that review might come out with. The purpose of the review is to look at how we can safely get international travel back again.
Can you guarantee that this will be the last lockdown?
Well, this is why we have chosen to go on this cautious path. The aim of doing it is the aim of doing this is to make sure that it's irreversible. But certainly my whole experience of the past year, and I think everyone that's watching's experience of the past year, is you can't rule things out. But we have every confidence that we won't have to have another lockdown because we've done this, and we will. It is the last thing in the world we would want to do, and I'm confident that because of these measures, we will avoid having a further lockdown. That is why we are taking a more cautious approach.
Now, we mentioned vaccine passports. You need to get people into theatres, into sports stadia quite quickly. You've said yourself it has to happen quite soon this summer. That's going to mean some kind of certification system. Can you give us an idea of what that might look like? Will it be NHS apps which say, yes, this person has had a test within the last 72 hours, or this person has been vaccinated? How is it going to work?
Well, first of all, we have not made decisions on a COVID certification, but I think it's important that we examine it, because if we're to get from where we hope to be at stage 3, that is where we were roughly in the summer, to last summer, through to much greater easing in the middle of June to make areas of our national life viable for the first time, we need to look at all options. Sure. Michael Gove is leading that review. I'm working with him. And of course, you can look, for example, at what's happening in Israel and elsewhere to see the sort of factors that are contained within.
My point is that time is short, however. You yourself have said that you're really worried about the future of the industries if you don't get people back in this summer. And yet the Prime Minister said there's no chance of a vaccine passport until everybody's been vaccinated, which doesn't possibly happen till the end of July. So somehow you've got to get some kind of certification system if the theatres, if the sports club are going to survive before that.
Well, not necessarily. So this is why we're conducting these pilots. So from the middle of April, we'll be conducting pilots in all sorts of different environments, whether that's at the FA Cup final for outdoors or whether it's at the Crucible for indoors. And we'll be testing a number of factors, including ventilation, one-way systems, the effect of spread. So we will try and get the best possible rules to allow that to happen. And remember also in the summer, this is a respiratory disease. So there is a natural easing of the disease over the summer, which gives us further scope for easing. We have the continued rollout of the vaccine programme. Now, it won't be complete, but we'll be a large way along the path. And remember, once we've got through all the over 50s, which we're confident that we will do by the middle of April, that has a huge effect in terms of hospitalisations and in terms of deaths. Those were the things that drove us into the restrictions last time round. So there is flexibility. Of course, we'll consider COVID certification as well, but it is not the only factor.
So let's take a concrete example. July the 11th, the Euro Championship final in Wembley, which has got no roof, it's open. Is it going to be full?
Well, I very much hope we'll get to as close as we can to being full. That's the ambition that we've set out.
What does that mean? Sorry.
Well, I can't give you a guarantee right now because, first of all, we have to make sure that we continue to meet their targets for the rollout of the vaccine, the spread of the disease and so on. So we have to pass those 4 tests to have an easing from the middle of June. Secondly, we're carrying out these pilots to see how we can do it as safely as possible. But the whole aim of it is to get to the point where we have as little social distancing as possible and to have it as full as possible. But I think to jump ahead to that point now it's just a bit too early. We need to go through those pilots, but the ambition is absolutely clear to get as many people in as we possibly can, but to do so in a safe way.
Full disclosure, I want to go to the theatre, I want to go and hear live music, and I certainly want to go to the pub. What is the moral case against a vaccine passport?
Well, first of all, I share your desire, and it's top of my list to make all of those things happen, particularly the ones for which I have responsibility. I completely understand the concerns that people have raised on civil liberties grounds and other issues. That's why we set up this review, so we can weigh up the benefits in terms of limiting the spread. We can weigh up the costs. We can weigh up how we can deliver it. And I think it's important that
But you're going to have to come to a decision quite soon.
Yeah,
and some of your backbenchers are still very worried. Steve Baker talks about it being a ghastly trap. David Davies says the real aim of the certification system is to coerce people to get vaccinated. And that is absolutely wrong. What do you say to him?
Well, I think to have effective government policy and decision making, it's important that we review all the evidence and we take a proper decision on it. That's why I'm working closely with the Chancellor of Duchy of Lancaster. The Health Secretary is involved, the Transport Secretary is involved. We're looking at the civil liberties concerns about it, we're looking at the practicality of it, but also we're looking at the benefits it could bring in the way that you described in order to facilitate further easing of the economy and allowing us to get back to doing the things that we love. Of course, we would never look to do this on a permanent basis. It's just whether it might be a tool in the short run.
Now, I think it's fair to say that you were a friend of David Cameron's. You worked very closely with him. Did you come across Lex Greensill?
Well, I've been racking my brains on this. To the very best of my knowledge, it's not meant as a politician's answer. I have no recollection of meeting with him. I'm pretty sure I didn't, but I suppose it's possible that it happened.
Now, given what you've read in the Sunday Times this morning, either the Sunday Times has got it really badly wrong or David Cameron is in deep trouble. Do you think there should now be an independent inquiry, as has been suggested, into this?
Well, I believe there's been an investigation into lobbying and he's been cleared on that. I'll just say a number of things on this. First of all, as far as I can tell, no decision in government policy was changed as a result of any meetings that took place. They would be properly declared. More important than any of that, I've worked with David Cameron for a number of years, as you said. I think he's a man of the utmost integrity, and I have no doubt at all he would have behaved properly throughout all of this.
But this looks awful. Alistair Graham, former chairman of the Committee on Public Standards in Public Life, says there clearly should be a full inquiry because it sounds like a genuine scandal in which the public purse was put at risk without proper political authority. Cameron should be made to answer questions about decisions for which he was accountable in office. I just put it to you, as a friend of David Cameron, that is right.
Well, obviously, I don't know the full ins and outs of this, but everything that I've seen has suggested, in line with my experience with working with David Cameron, that he behaved with complete integrity through this.
So no inquiry. I was talking a little while ago to Mark Drakeford. He says that the union is under greater threat than at any time in his life. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think we have a very, very serious choice. The Scottish people have a very serious choice at the elections coming up in May. And it's really, do we get on with the job, so of defeating COVID and rebuilding it afterwards, or do we get caught up in yet more constitutional wrangling when we thought we'd addressed this 4 or 5 years ago, and back in fact, it's more than that now, isn't it? 7 years ago when we had the referendum. Things haven't changed since then, but what has changed is we've had COVID, and it's important that we get on with dealing with that.
Just coming back to my question, do you agree with Mark Drakeford that the union is in greater peril than at any time in his lifetime?
Well, I think there is a real risk here, and the way to deal with that risk is to make sure that you vote for a Conservative Party and unionist parties that are committed to ensuring that our precious union that I see every day as Culture Secretary, the strength that we have with all parts of our nation coming together, the richness that we brought to the life of the world should be preserved. It would be a tragedy if that was put at risk.
Oliver Dowden, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to us. That's all from me. Thanks to all my guests and to you for watching. We're off next week, I'm glad to say, for Easter Sunday. So I will be back here in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye.